Welcome back, theater lovers, to another exciting episode of the BSB Podcast. Today we're rounding the Wells Fargo wagon and setting off for Mason City, Iowa, in the first part of our Music Man discussion. However, before we dive in, follow, and subscribe to us at bsb.insider on all social media platforms. Spoiler warning, we're discussing the North American touring production of The Music Man. So if you haven't seen it yet and wish to go into it without any spoilers, pause this video and return once you have. RJ, as you know, I saw this show back when it was on Broadway with Hugh and Sutton Foster. And you also know that I was not a huge fan of it at the time, which says a lot about just how old that this musical is. It's an old musical. It's been revived more times than my uncle after his many heart attacks. No, I'm just kidding. We don't have an uncle that had heart attacks, but that being said, it's been revived so many times. Have you seen this show before going to see it at the Fox Theater?
Professionally, no. And even not professionally, one time.
The Birmingham Village Players.
Yes.
Which was actually recent. This was a recent production that they did. It was definitely better than Broadway. I'm going to say that. It was better than Broadway. I'm sure it's exactly what people expected, but I think it's also exactly what people expect. It is an old show. And not to throw you under the bus, but you actually were in a production of The Music Man. So you have a longer history of this show than just Birmingham Village Players.
Yeah, I did it 20 years ago. Almost
20 years.
You
were what, 12 then?
At that time, it felt old. So if that says anything, if it was old 20 years ago, it's real old now.
I think that, we say old, but really what we mean is classic. This is classic golden age, silver age, maybe Broadway. This is from the time of Oklahoma and The Sound of Music. It speaks to a very particular era of Broadway tunes, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think that it does age itself when you think about the show you're going into. When you think about the crowd that was even there when we were there.
Yeah, I mean, this is the era of, I actually, for some reason, immediately got the picture of when you walk into the Museum of Broadway, and one of the first exhibits basically is featuring some of the musical score for this production.
You talk about the one that's all the paper and it looks like it's all crazy wild and
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know why that just so vividly came into my head, but shout out to the Museum of Broadway. Go check it out if you haven't. But it's that age old 10-minute overture.
Yeah.
Well, and first number, I should say, because the first number is technically the end of the overture. I'm not sure if they're even considered two separate songs, but and the setup, that type of, we'll obviously get into the music during part 2, but just the type of music in the show, it tells you exactly what kind of show it's going to be.
It's funny that you say that about the overture, because I just want to say real quick that there is actually not an overture on the musical numbers. It just is considered Rock Island, which is that first one. But when you look at this compared to The Sound of Music, which we recently saw at the Fox Theater as well, both of these had that, the overture, okay, listeners, if you haven't been to a really classic show, or you haven't watched The Sound of Music in the movies and stuff like that, you have that song at the beginning that plays. It's like a medley of all the songs that is to come. And even though that they're including this in Rock Island, the Music Man has that. It's starting you off. It's kind of introducing you to all the different melodies and tonally the different pieces that we're going to come back to, that we're going to hit. And there is a long bit to it. I want to say that this is one of the shorter ones that we've seen, but there is, when you start talking about a classic show, you have that overture that just lasts forever.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess to be fair, it is only 3.5 minutes, but
Is
it
it?
is the longest 3.5 minutes. Um, because I think because it's just slow. Like it's just this like grandiose, like, and as we've spoken previously, those like I'll say entrance songs, even if it's not formally considered an overture, the point of it was to get people into their seats while nothing was happening on stage. So, I mean, and still applicable today, because how many times do you have the person from the front row who doesn't show up on time? The show starts, the music's happening, and then, a line of 6 people go all the way to the front, to sit in the front row. So it does what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't actually truly add literally anything except a buffer.
What I love about this story, everybody, is that RJ is talking about our actual experience at the Music Man when we had a line of 6 people during Rock Island, or that were walking to the front, and not even the front, but like in front of us, and stopped, and like during that intro music, but into the first song as well. So it's like, it's funny that as soon as you said that, I was like, wait a second, that happened to us, RJ. You are just speaking of experience of seeing the Music Man. But it
Well,
does work. Like, it does work. That's exactly like that first song. There isn't always a lot happening in there. It is setting up a little bit of the story. But even what's interesting, and again, we'll talk about the music in part 2, but I have to mention this now because I'm going to forget, because I always forget when I say this in part 1. Rock Island starts with most of the song not being about anything, and it's the very end of the song that's actually important to introduce you to who Harold Hill is. It does give you that extra 6 to 7 minutes to get your butt in a seat and to not interrupt the show, which people definitely took advantage of for this production that we saw.
yeah, and I'll say, truly, it doesn't do. I mean, we get like a little bit of prequel, right? Like, here's the setting. Like, here's what you're about to jump into. I guess helpful for those who like, because we no longer have traveling salesmen, or at least like our version of them are just salespeople online or on the phone or something. Like you're not getting a door to door person very often anymore. Whereas in that time and space, it was like constant. So someone, maybe even like, I'd say I'm familiar with a traveling sales person, but my sister, who is 8 years younger than I am, would probably have zero idea. So in the sense that it is establishing just even a vocabulary
Sure.
around that, in order for us to understand what this individual will be doing, that I can understand. But I think for those of us that like already kind of had an idea, it was kind of like, where is this? Why are we sitting here for an additional 4 minutes?
And for those who don't know, RJ grew up in the town that was outside of the city limits. Because what do you mean you know what a traveling salesman is? As I pull my mic close to my face, we didn't have traveling salesmen down in the city.
We did. I mean, like to a different degree. Like, again, evolution of time, right? But like, and again, I'm for sure aging myself, and I might sound like a lunatic to anyone who didn't experience this in their childhood. But like, we had and this is city too, but we had the Schwann's truck, and they technically are traveling salesmen. Like, there's a magazine that you order from, basically, and then this truck would come and deliver it. It was all frozen food, and deliver it to your house. And that was like before. This is before delivery. This is before DoorDash. This is before, like, this is like the in between of the old school, like our parents' generation, who got like their milk delivered fresh every day, right? And their newspaper. And then us, or this generation, like not Gen X, Gen Z, who like can get a meal delivered.
Mm-hmm.
That's the in between.
Okay, Grandpa, with your fuck. Listen, so us city folk down here, we didn't necessarily have that. We had Girl Scout cookie deliverers. We had religious salespeople in a way. Shout out to the Book of Mormon. Go see it. Celebrating 15th anniversary on Broadway. But we didn't have necessarily traveling salesmen. Except I remember one vividly, which we're going to go on a tangent real quick, people. Thank you for joining me here today. We had a vacuum salesman one time come in and demonstrate to my mom how to use this vacuum. She had no intention of buying it, but they just needed to show her it. Other than that, traveling salesmen were like, at least in my part of the city, we didn't have traveling salesmen. So it's interesting that you're like, yeah, I grew up, apparently, little house on the prairie over here had traveling salesmen, but we necessarily did not.
Well, and that's funny, like, and maybe I'm just, again, this is like early childhood, so this is like the 90s, but yeah, they're like like the only way to get like a magazine subscription, like, was a traveling salesman. Or actually, my mom and I were just talking about dictionary and books were traveling
Sure.
salespeople, and you bought, or it was encyclopedias, and you had to like buy so many, and they would come back and sell you, this letter through this letter or whatever the heck. And actually, a lot of my childhood library was from traveling salesmen. My mom bought like the, not Disney books, Dr. Seuss books.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it feels like forever ago, but it was what, 30, less than 30 years?
What I love about this too is that you're making me feel like I'm younger, but I'm older than you. But I think that it's just a different way of living. It's just we had a Kmart that was literally 2 minutes down the road, where maybe you had to drive a little bit faster not faster, well, maybe faster, but you drive a little farther for a Kmart. So for you, traveling salesman made sense. It came right to your door. And in fact, when DoorDash started coming around, it almost was like a foreign concept to us of being like, the people can just deliver things to your house. That's not Amazon. Like, so I'm going to give you that. I'm going to give you that. Like, this was a tangent, but I think it sets the scene for this show, and just like how you're right, the show is Rock Island really does kind of set like what is a traveling salesman, and also who the hell Harold Hill is, and how is he impacting kind of the story of what's going on in this little town in Iowa, the middle of nowhere, America's America. And so I'm agreeing that I understand where you're coming from, even if you are old.
I mean, hey, I still don't think Oxford has DoorDash. So some things are just stuck in time.
I went to Oxford once, as you know, and the town is literally looks like it could be from The Music Man.
It could. It's got it's not even considered a town. It's considered a village. That's how small it is. But all of this to say, proof that these things can still very much exist, just depending on location and accessibility.
Look at you. Bring it a full circle. That was a full circle moment. And I think that it does bring me to the themes of the show. When I was trying to think of the themes of The Music Man, I think this speaks to the age of the show. And by George, if there's a different theme, anybody, please let me know. All I could think of was love. I feel like that's the whole premise of the show. Like, there is kind of a little bit of like good versus bad, who's good, who's bad, who's a con man, because obviously Harold Hill is a con man. But I feel like the point of The Music Man was love, which feels rather, again, outdated, old, classic Broadway. Is there a theme for this show that jumps out to you other than love, or am I missing something here?
Yes and no. I would say there's a couple different lenses that you could take from the show. One of them is love. Or it's like variations of love. So when I think of love, of course, you have like the primary characters who fall in love. Okay, that's old news. Then you have the idea of love in a familial sense and growth and development character-wise based on love that is shown to each other. And then, like, the whole community, the whole town, the whole city, whatever we wanna call it, what happens when they start to love, maybe not even maybe themselves, maybe each other, maybe the things that they're doing, which is not when we're introduced to them, that's not a core value that I think really exists.
I'd actually like to really jump on that point because I think you are correct. When I was interviewing Patrick Bleschel, who plays the mayor, he was talking about how these Iowans are like stubborn and like strong-headed and don't like change and like all these really harsh feelings. And so when you think about it that way, it is truly about them who like not to be religious here, but love thy neighbor, like really build a community. They're finding each other, things they like about each other. And in the way they're even they're developing love for people they don't know. They end up forgiving Harold, for his actions. They end up wanting to just have something bigger and to be more connected. And so I do think that is the love that truly stood out to me because, like, me, I could take or leave the romantic love. That's great for the storyline that it is. It is a big chunk of the story. But I think the piece that you can really chew on here is what's happening with the community and the love that they're building for each other, which is the piece I think is so universal and timeless about the show and why people really need to maybe watch The Music Man and get that because we could use a little bit more of love in the community.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different facets to it really because you could break it down per the individual, right? Like you could even if you were to look at Harold individually, like you're not a con artist because you feel good about yourself. You know what I mean? Like typically you're
Mhm.
doing that because there's probably some issues that are need to be addressed, but you aren't addressing them. And yeah, the I don't I don't think people want to like the plot point around Harold and Marion because it's toxic AF, right? Like the push and the pull, the avoidance, that like kind of storybook love, is not real, right? Or it's not healthy
Sure.
to be like, I just magically fall in love with a stranger overnight because he was nice to my brother.
Which is very, again, that's so old school Broadway in a way of just being like oh, I fell for you overnight because of this thing. Like, it is very, I can see why that was appealing back in the day. I can see why some people are still have an appeal to that because that is very much like white knight on a horse and like coming in to save the day. And like, there's beauty to that kind of story, but I don't think that it's reflective of like the type of, I think it was reflective for the time in which it was developed for the people who were in that time. I mean, this is a musical that was on Broadway in 1957. And we have to admit that the world was very different back then. And we're telling a story from the early 1900s, like 1800, no, 1912. Like, these are women who were being ostracized for being like Marion. She's wrong for not having a husband. She's cold and callous, and she has all these different things about her that is wrong because she doesn't have a man. So like the idea of like a man coming to save you is so appealing in that aspect. But truthfully, I was like, that's not the love that I want. I want the love of like me and my neighbors can get along and they're going to protect me and we're going to do this together and like they're going to forgive me when I make mistakes and I'm going to forgive them when they make mistakes because that is what we truly crave and need in today's society.
Well, and ironically, I think when this was created, it was not the norm, right? Like for a woman to be like, I don't want that guy or I don't want a guy. And then listing out the expectations that she had for a man, like you don't do that, right? It was the man's choice. He had his pick of the flock, and you just did it because he had money, um, because you had no rights as a woman or
Right.
minimal rights as a woman. And so all of your rights were dependent on the man that you married. So for Marion's character to be like, yeah, my white knight is not that. Like he's just actually a kind human being. That was probably like like they're expressing in the show, right? Like it actually ties, I'd say, quite well to one of our favorite Disney films, Beauty and the Beast.
Okay,
Belle.
I'm here. I'm listening. I'm locked in.
I mean, Belle is the same with Gaston, right? Like there's this
Correct.
expectation. He is the epitome of masculinity. Um, I'd say the difference here, obviously, being we're going from con man to semi decent, or I won't even say semi decent human because I still think Harold is obviously a jerk. But the redemptive quality is the fact that he analyzes that and acknowledges it. And obviously, we don't get to see beyond that because the show ends. But again, in a time where men would have never been like, oh, this is my fault, I did a bad thing. It's like turn of the century.
But I hear what you're saying. But this is my view, and he admits wrong, but he never admits that he's sorry, especially for what he did to Marion.
No, yeah. Well, exactly. So and that's where I don't think I don't think it's a complete redemption story by any means, because obviously we leave off way too early to know character-wise what he becomes. I think it alludes to a redemption arc based on like the play is harder to follow because we don't get like the cut to scene, right? Like it's this like weird, we all hate him, and now they're playing instruments badly, and now everyone's in band uniforms and it's all over. Like
Correct.
I'm assuming that time has gone by based on the film. I'm assuming that time has gone by. We are now a well-established band, and he again is doing something else with his life aside from being a con artist. But those are all assumptions. None of that is actually given to us in the show itself.
I did look it up to see if there was a specific time jump, and they do not acknowledge that. So that's interesting. Also interesting is that in the movie there's a song. Oh no, there's actually a song called "My White Knight." I didn't realize that because I had just.
So when you made that reference, I was like, is he referencing the song that's literally in this show?
Oh, okay. So in my defense, everybody, we did happen to have a break at that point, and I ran for the bathroom. So clearly my mind did not connect that was the name of the song. And for that, I am sorry. But hey, that was just a really interesting coincidence that we love. But I do think you're right. Like, there's obviously and I'm not trying to be like, oh, he should apologize. I mean, he absolutely should. But that's neither here nor there. I think that just it tells you the time of the story. I do think it also really brings in the other thing that stood out to me is like good versus bad, and like who's really the villain and who's the good guy. And the thing I like about the Music Man is that they never actually paint a specific picture on like who is villainous, who is bad. Everybody's kind of got some gray. Everyone's kind of got a little bit of both. Harold himself is not like necessarily a great man. He's kind in many ways, but he's also screwing over a town, and he's done it multiple times. Miriam is just very sharp and also cuts some corners when she decides that she likes him. You have the mayor, who is just kind of a hard ass, but he's funny. You know, like there's like not the takeaway is that like I think that there's not really a villain of the story, but everyone's just kind of morally gray depending on the situation, all in this kind of name of like searching for good, bad, love, and like that's kind of the undertone of this of like, can you say Harold Hill's a bad person? Some would probably argue yes, but like he's done bad things. Does that make him a bad person? And I feel like I could do that with every single person throughout this entire show.
Yeah, the personality versus like what they're actually doing, because arguably some of the, I'd say, stereotypical least favorite characters from this show I think are like Charlie Cowell. Even though like he's actually a good guy, like he's actually just trying to do his job and save salespeople from getting bad name, but he's gross, right? So we don't like him, even though
Yeah.
he was trying to actually do a good thing. But like nobody, I don't think I've ever like no one likes him. No one like walks away and is like, that Charlie guy, he was really trying to do some good. Um, they
If
actually prefer Harold most of the I would say, because like you said, he is kind, he's doing shitty things, but if you take away the shitty things, what's there?
right. He's hot. I mean, that's obviously something they play up in these shows, RJ. Don't even act. They make Harold Hill an attractive person because they want you psychologically to assume he is a good person. And that's why salesmen tend to be attractive people, because they can do shitty things and get away with it. Sorry, I didn't mean to just say he was hot, but also Elliot Andrews is hot. Like, let's be honest here. I'm not going to sugarcoat that.
So we all know why Brian went to the show.
No, I went there to enjoy it with you and your family. We had a great time. But I think that you're saying is right. Like, when you compare him to Charlie, Harold is attractive. When you look at what happened on Broadway, Hugh Jackman is objectively attractive. And that is on purpose. I say it that way, RJ, because Hugh Jackman is not always my type. Leave me alone, okay?
I know this, but I'm just hoping that everyone watching or everyone listening, and if you can't see Brian's face, like it's all over his face that he does not feel that way.
But like there's a clear definition of like Harold's good because he's good looking. And that's part of the storyline, even though they never talk about that. He could talk his way out of any situation, but if he looked like Charlie, which I don't think Charlie's actually not attractive, but when you look at him, you're like, oh, Harold could talk his way out of it because people find him conventionally attractive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there is I mean, when you think of the parts where he's avoiding needing to give his credentials for like the entire show, it's based on his ability to sneak by, right? Or to distract or what have you. And how often would that happen had he not been conventionally attractive?
Correct. That would not have happened at all because he doesn't come off slimy, even though he's absolutely an earthworm in those moments. Like, that is truly what it is. And like, you see Charlie, and Charlie looks sorry to the man who plays Charlie, Michael. I don't mean it this way, but he looks sweaty. He looks like he's greasy. He looks like he's disheveled. And so right off the bat, people were like, "Oh, we don't trust this man so much." The only person that really trusts him really is the mayor. You know?
I just had a epiphany moment. I'm not sure why these two things seem like they're in the same category because they're not. Uh, maybe it's just the costuming, but Charlie reminds me of the Beetle,
Oh, 1,000%.
and it could just be like
Absolutely.
the bowler hat, but just the whole look and feel, and the scene with Marion, right, where when he's a little bit, he's gross, right? He's like, I'd like to do a lot more. Dot dot
Hmm.
dot. Okay,
Yeah,
pretty forward.
for
Whereas,
sure.
yeah, we have the sweet talking Harold who's like, I would never, I could never, I just love you.
If we're going to use Sweeney Todd for a moment, and we're going to talk about the Broadway one specifically, but regardless of what cast you saw the one that was Aaron Tveit. I saw both. I also saw with Josh Groban. The person they have to play the Beetle is not as attractive as Sweeney, and therefore people think there's like an attractiveness to Sweeney, but Sweeney's cutting people's throats and putting them in meat pies. Like he's clearly actually not a good person. And it's the same with Harold, not to this extreme, but like this feeling of you can get a lot more by being attractive. Um, and I also feel really bad having this conversation because you did play Beetle, and I'm like trying to be like, look at you, you slimy dog. But like, there is a difference in those moments, you know?
Honestly, the word that like made me initially think of it, it for some reason is sweaty. Like I just think of like even the hair and the grease. Like yeah, both grease balls. but one is meant to be the charmer and float through life, and one is meant to be the bad guy.
Correct. So, of our cast and our crew, without the exception of their singing, which we're going to talk to, I do think it's interesting that when I look at this list, there's 3 names that I keep coming back to for just standout performances. I mean, they're all good. Hats off to all of them. Obviously, Harold Hill, we've already gone over that. I don't need to cover that one again. Elliot Andrews, thank you very much for your service. Marion, I loved Elizabeth. Her performance as Marion was just top notch. I also found myself just laughing my ass off with Patrick as the mayor. I do think that he was the perfect straight guy for the comedy, and the comedy came off perfection. But again, this is a really talented cast. There's a lot of dancing. There's a lot of things that we'll talk about part 2. But of the performances, these 3 really stood out to me. And Harold Hill's number 1. Anyways, Archie, so what really stands out to you about this cast and their performances?
On the
Yes,
flip
we know.
side,
Harold Hill's the best.
I would say Marion is my top.
I knew it. There's no. You were so enamored with her performance. I could see it on your face when we were there.
Yeah, I to be honest, it took a minute. Like, it took a minute for me to realize what she was doing, like why she was making the acting choices that she was making. But then when we got to the end of Act 1 and going into Act 2, I was like, oh, like all of the decisions leading up to that point were intentional. So that this felt different.
Yep.
So it was sneaky, but like in a good way.
Much like the Music Man.
That's true. I also really liked her mom, Savannah,
Yes.
playing Mrs. Peru. She also, I mean, the accent was perfection, and just it was just the little things. Like her comedy, the nuance of her comedy was really good. That was probably my number 1 for comedy.
Yeah, for sure. That really strong comedic. Because again, it's kind of like the Mayor's, where it was like so subtle at first. You were like, oh, I'm laughing, because it almost doesn't hit you for like the splittest of a second.
Yeah, it was just, it didn't need to be, because I'm not sure that like I can only think of actually like 1 or 2 lines that were made as jokes, but it was the subtleties of the movement, the way that they were on stage, or just the physical acting, that sometimes like having done this show, I would say I think that's a role, like some of these roles just get buried because you are so heavily leaning on Harold and Marion, but um still obviously very much heavy on the acting side because they are singing less. I mean, they're singing more in the ensemble. They're singing less solo wise. I'm not even sure if Mrs. Peru has any solo lines, but
I don't think so.
Yeah, acting wise.
I do think that I also need to give a shout out to two other people, 2 other actors, 2 other characters. Marcellus was also hysterical. Paul Urola was just great in that role. Was a standout. I don't remember remembering Marcellus in any other show, so I don't know if there's something different he was doing with his performance of this. But there was something that was almost, again, kind of that cheesy goofball that was really cool. And also Dylan Patterson as Winthrop. That lisp that he does the entire show and keeps it up, and just like the energy he has, I get it. He's a young kid, but exceptional too.
Yeah, I agree. Marcellus, I was curious if that was a director decision or an acting decision, just the characterization of that role, because I've never seen it played so loud before. Like I've always kind of seen him as the sidekick. That's relatively quiet. Like that's kind of staying in the
Yes.
shadows to kind of cover for Harold. And in this, it seemed way more, out loud, proud, like just leaning into it. For some reason, it gave me Book of Mormon
Yes.
vibes. Um,
It reminded me of Josh Gad a lot,
yes,
in the performance.
yes, that's exactly. I was like, are they twins?
They could be. They could be. And so with that, though, RJ, we are running out of time. However, listeners, stay tuned for part 2 of our The Music Man discussion. Before you go, let us know if The Music Man is one of your favorite musicals in the comments. Thanks again for joining us here in our box seats. Until next curtain call.